Jai we'll start with the Nokar mantra. Om Namo Arihantanam, Om Namo Sittanam, Om Namo Ayariyanam, Om Namo Jayanam, Namo Loe Savasahunam, Eso Pancha Namo Karo, Sava Pavapanasano, Mangalalancha Savesim, Paramam Have Mangalam, Paramam Have Mangalam. Did anyone do last week's challenge, which was to say no to something you really want?
Well, I did. I don't know if I did consciously for that reason, but I did say no to something that I was planning on, and then it's kind of time management as well. So I have done that. It was pretty hard, but I did it.
How did it make you feel?
It was sort of an uncomfortable feel still to this point, and again, this was for creating time for myself, and that's why it's a bit uncomfortable. I'm like, yeah, I still could have done that. Why did I say no to it? But it's a strange feeling.
And you said no because you wanted to create time for yourself, which you're allowed to do. And it's strange for you to be selfish in that way. But it's not selfish. And I give you permission to do it because you're working on yourself and it's okay to have boundaries. Yeah. I said no to a food item. And the real benefit I got was interrogating my thoughts and feelings during that. I would love to tell you that I felt great after doing it, and I felt like I was breaking my chains. I'm probably not there yet because I felt like, well, first, I felt my short-term brain. So we all know we have different, the way the brain is structured, we call it 1 to 2 to 3 brains in our head, some that developed later. And so I felt that short-term part of my brain, sometimes called the id, start to make excuses in real time, rapid fire, why I shouldn't say no to the item. So, and I felt that going through my head. And I could see my two brains fighting each other, right? In real time. And so it's very interesting to do that. And so as soon as my long-term brain defeated my short-term brain, and I knew that I wasn't going to have the food item, I could then feel my short-term brain, whereas a minute before it started to make excuses of why I should have the food item, I could feel my short-term brain reprogram itself and start to go through acceptance in real time. Well, I'm doing something great for myself and it's kind of like a reverse sour grape situation, starting to make myself feel good about saying no to that food item as soon as it was defeated by the long-term brain. And another thing that was kind of really beneficial was I was just standing back like a passive participant watching these two boxers fight it out. And then as soon as one lost, he said, "Good game, you win, you're the better person." And so it had nothing to do with me. It had nothing to do with me. It had everything to do with my past and what I like and what makes my mouth water and what gives my brain dopamine. It had nothing to do with my soul, who was just sitting there watching this play out as if on a television screen in my mind. And so that was very interesting. And so I recommend that you do it and you interrogate your thoughts and feelings. And so a lot of times we can't do that. But in order to start doing that, to be able to see your thoughts as if they were flashing on the screen, you should, of course, meditate, where you sit in one position and the only exercise you're doing is you're watching which thoughts your subconscious delivers to your brain and letting it go and perhaps wondering why it did that and perhaps getting to the bottom of, well, there's no reason it did that because your brain constantly thinks, just like your heart wants to constantly pump and it all constantly wants to think about things, and your subconscious is doing its job and constantly delivering various stimuli to your brain to see if that's what makes it get stuck in a thought pattern. And so I recommend that you do that. And so with that in mind, up until now, we haven't talked about Jain food much because it gets talked about way too often, right? So I avoid the topic. And Jainism is in danger of being only known for its dietary restrictions. And that's for a couple of reasons. And those reasons are because it's the primary exposure that non-Jains have with Jains, because they don't see what's going on in our head. They don't see what's going on at the Jain Center, but they do see what I bring for lunch every day. For example, the people at my work. Second, because food is a relatable topic of conversation between people. Everybody knows different religions have different dietary restrictions, so it's interesting to talk about. And third, because this food thing allows Jains to explain ahimsa very well. And so those are the reasons that it gets talked about so often and kind of why we generally avoid talking about it here. But I realized I had an epiphany, of course. The primary focus of this class has always been and will always be how to take Jainism out of the classroom and into your life. And eating Jain food is an amazing way to practice ahimsa, and probably the best bang for your buck to practice samvar. Samvar is, of course, the blocking of karma that attaches to your soul. You can do that in a lot of ways, but the most efficient way for you to do it, the most amount of samvar you can do with the least amount of action, is to partake in a Jain diet. So today we're going to talk about Jain food, and then we probably won't discuss it again for a long time. So the first thing to know about the Jain diet is that it's based on ahimsa. The reason we don't eat meat is because animals are capable of suffering much more intensely than plants, and we want to reduce the amount of violence that we do. Similarly, 5-sense beings are capable of much more suffering than 1-sense beings. So we want to reduce our diet to only 1-sense beings. Also, eating root vegetables causes more violence than eating non-root vegetables. And there are a couple of reasons for that. First, you kill the entire plant when you uproot it, rather than taking its fruit or flower, which doesn't kill the entire plant. And second, root vegetables contain much more jeev than non-root vegetables. And aside from ahimsa, there's an auxiliary reason for the Jain diet, and it's not to inflame passions. Now, that sounds like really radical, but it sounds pretty extreme, but the point is to disconnect emotion from food. There's no reason that the two should be connected, but of course they are. When you disconnect emotions from food, you don't get disappointed when you don't get what you want. You don't expect something to get something good and then bring emotions into play when you don't. And of course, everybody in this class knows that expectations are a big part of why emotions come into play. And you realize that it's all just a waste of time. And connecting emotions to food can only lead to bad karma. It will never ever lead you to good karma. So why do it at all? We of course understand the concept of rag and dvesh and how that leads to a decrease in the quality of your life. And that of course applies to food. Don't have favorite foods. Don't have unfavorite foods. This of course is why when a holy person eats, he only eats what is given. He doesn't ask for anything. And if nothing is given, then nothing is eaten. That's of course a very extreme way to do it, but we want to practice a non-extreme way to do it. So questions or comments about the theory of the Jain diet and why we do what we do?
I do have a comment. Obviously Jainism is sort of known for its diet and diet restrictions, to be more precise. But honestly, I remember one of the incidents when I came to US for the first time and invited a lot of folks for food. And at our place, we had a birthday at our place and such. The reason I wanted to bring out, it's not just Jainism. It's like, it's a wedding. Any event, let's take JSH example, right? I mean, we have food, we'll have people. It just makes it convenient. I mean, obviously for Pachala and things like that, but it's just, I think somehow the entire society is connected to that. Any event is associated with it, more so in Indian culture than any other. No, even I guess in US culture there is that, but I wonder why. I don't know the answer, but just food, it's become inherent part of, obviously we all need fuel, we know that, but then it's like, going above and beyond and on top of basic necessities. What's the reason in different cultures?
Oh, so the reason is this concept of breaking bread with the stranger. And if you break bread with the stranger enough time, he becomes your friend. And of course, the reason before that is our brains were wired in a certain way as to the sharing of food and keeping track of who gave food to us and we should give food to them. And that strengthens the bond between people because before modern times, in prehistoric time, it was all about survival, and survival was, of course, all about food. And so our social connections are based on food. Other questions or comments? And that, brings up a very good point. Whereas if we're trying to disconnect emotions from food, but we realize there's this very human aspect to sharing food strengthens the bond between people, what is the role of the Jain Center? Isn't there a tension in that? Well, the Jain Center is supposed to educate you to not associate food with emotion. But of course, there are other reasons people come to the Jain Center that are perfectly valid, and that the Jain Center provides a social aspect to strengthen the bonds within the community. And that's the easiest way to do it because that's what our brains are wired to do. So there is a kind of a tension, a back and forth in that, and which side you think should win will depend on what value you think the Jain Center provides and what kind of function you think the Jain Center is supposed to perform. And plus, a lot of people won't come to things if we don't offer lunch.
And honestly, not to, I think we are, just to clarify my point, there are other temples, that sometimes we consider doing pretty well. They do the same thing. The food is attraction, and then it almost, to me, it's like a way to grow, which I don't think it happens at any Jain Derasar or not even JSH, but somewhere else. We don't try to attract people by food, but that is almost an attraction. Even churches do that. Churches offer food in colleges and campuses to attract college kids and things like that. So I think it's somehow considered a way to attract. It's the way I can put it.
Certainly food is a great marketing tool, and people have known that for centuries. And you can either think that they're good marketers and exploiting the human brain for their purposes, or, if you think that they're too good at marketing, you can think that it's a bad thing. And it depends on, where you fall in that spectrum. But certainly I understand that food has been used as a marketing tool and will continue to be used. And I think that we're guilty of that too. Thanks to everybody who just joined. We're talking about Jain food today. And so we just talked about the theory of why Jain dietary restrictions exist is, of course, to promote ahimsa and to prevent passions from being inflamed about having favorite foods and not favorite foods. So let's talk about those non-meat restrictions. Different people have different ideas about that. I'm presenting to you now one idea that one person has about this non-meat restrictions. So here's a list of non-Jain items, if you can see it. So, of course, root vegetables at the top: carrots, potatoes, onions, garlic, speech, yams, turnips, gingers, etc. Mushroom, the same way. You kill the whole plant when you talk about mushrooms. Spinach, I was surprised to see on the list. So this is a spectrum, right? Ahimsa is a spectrum. And so perhaps the harvesting of spinach does more violence than I thought. Eggplant, honey, of course, which is produced by bees. Figs are not Jain because of the way they propagate. They propagate via use of the eggs of insects. Gelatin is made with animal products. Potato starch and tapioca starch, I was surprised to see on this list. Of course, potato is at the very top, but people, they thought it important enough to include the starches. Butter, cheese, especially cheese with animal rennet, potato starch, and animal enzymes in it are not Jain. Increasingly, the trend is to consider that the vegan diet is the Jain diet. That is somewhat controversial. It's not controversial if you think about it enough, but we're headed in that direction, and there are people trying to push it in that direction, and I probably think that's a good direction to head. So, of course, there's going to be some resistance to that. Bean sprouts are considered not Jain by this group, vinegar and yeast. And so this group divides Jain and non-Jain dietary restrictions into two groups. This first one we just talked about, and of course, because it's a spectrum, they should say they promote avoiding this second list of food, during holy days or Tithi observance days. So this is kind of if you want to be extra Jain about your diet, then do these or do this at least on Tithi days. Any fruits, fresh or dried, any vegetables, including peppers, lemons, and tomatoes. Raw bananas, not sure why that's on the list. Butter's on both lists. Frozen foods, cashew nuts, dried herbs. This, of course, will inflame passions. Bean sprouts, vinegar, coconut milk, sour cream, I believe, is on here because of its cultures. Ready-made bread, so store-bought rotis and naans, canned food, vacuum-packed meals or instant mixes, and yeast makes an appearance again. So everybody's going to have kind of different ideas about this. I'm sure that you disagree with some of the items on the list. Yes, me here.
Yeah, I want to challenge the vegan idea.
Okay.
And calling it Jain.
Right.
I think that seems to be the trend, and I know vegan wave is great. I think vegan helps following Jainism diet to some extent, but if we just review the list we just reviewed, it doesn't. I mean, the root vegetables are on the top, potato, and vegan diet, at least the ones I see that it's trying to follow. It's like, okay, we don't want to, we want to be vegan, but the grassroots are okay. And that's the part I would, especially within the Jain community, I feel should be the, I personally would not take that exception. Do not want to take that exception. Just saying that I'm following the vegan diet and it's okay to use the root vegetable because I'm vegan.
I think I misspoke. I did not mean a completely vegan diet. I meant incorporating the vegan diet into the Jain diet. So it's both no root vegetables, but also no milk, no dairy, like that.
And I completely support that. I think that's a good way to do it. But I see that what's happening more and more now, and especially, at least my perception, that when a lot of folks are trying to follow vegan, I think as being Jain, we should follow, if we can do an additional nirjara, that's great. But we need to continue with the minimum, what is said, at least within our culture.
Absolutely. So maybe a better wording would be a Jain vegan diet or a Jain diet with vegan concepts. Yes, Chintan.
Yeah, thank you. I was along the same lines with Mihir as well, but I don't believe you misspoke, because I've heard that terminology in multiple different conversations outside of JSH as well. My second point there also is when we talked about dry herbs and what, ginger versus soot, the dried ginger. That's something I can't comprehend. that it's okay to use soot, but ginger as such is not considered like Jain.
Got it. Anybody have an answer for Chintan? I don't have an answer either, and I tend to agree with you.
I'm guessing it's completely dried out. I'm not sure if it is. It's another concept is like, oh, I did not pick that vegetables. I'm consuming it. It's completely dried out and then it's been grinded, right? So, it's like a flour. If you want to put it, if you want to take it to your temple for your puja, if it falls on the ground and on a cloth, that's the ideal way to take the flowers and go to the temple with, not plucking it. It's a similar concept probably. I'm just thinking it out loud, that the roots are out, completely dried out, there is no other jiva in it, and then they grind it. Okay. Make powder, maybe.
Yes, Umesh.
That's like garlic powder, right? And onion powder. It's the same, right?
Yeah, it could be the same, you're right.
Yeah, Bhavin already answers. Ginger has the live, so you can grow again from red ginger. But once it's dry, you make it powder. It doesn't have the live, so you can use the soot.
I see. And one thing I would like to push back on is this concept of if somebody else did it, it's okay. It's not okay to promote, to buy a product that somebody else did it just because they incurred the karma. It's not okay to do that because we are promoting violence by buying a product that somebody else performed violence to do. So we should not actually use that as an excuse. Other questions or comments about that list? Okay, so let's take a look at some resources we have to try to incorporate a Jain diet in our life. Let's take a look at this. You can find this Jain cookbook. It's called Cuisine the Jain Way. And it is brought to us by these people. It's a recipe compilation. And these people participated in it. So thank you to these people. And let's take a look at the index. And we start with cooking pointers. All right, so let's take a look at these table of contents and see if there's anything that surprises us that we can make in a Jain way. Okay, look, tomato salsa. Apparently you can make tomato salsa without onions. That is very nice. Vegetable broth, hard to make without onions, some people would think. Thousand Island dressing, pizza sauce, pesto sauce. Let me know if you are interested in taking a closer look at any one of these. Okay, so that was the sauce thing, the sauce section. We have, here are our Indian recipes. Let's see. Oh, medu vada. You can make medu vada Jain way. That's very nice. Let's see. What else stands out to us as surprising? Rajma cheese paratha you can make in a Jain way. There's a Mexican section here. Let's see. Here we go. There's a vegan section here. We're on page 88, so quite a few vegetables. A vegan cheese recipe, vegan brownie cupcakes. Oh, here's the Mexican section. Olive and bell pepper quesadilla, Tex-Mex salsa, vegetable enchiladas, fajitas. Very hard to make Jain fajitas. That's on page 105. Here's some international dishes. Fiesta cheese fondue. Thai red curry. I think that would be very hard to make, Jane. And it ends with desserts. Okay, did anybody see anyone they wanted to take a closer look at?
Yeah, I would like the link for it.
Sure. Let's see. Let me find the link here. Okay. Cuisine the Jain way.
I will tell you one thing. We went to a couple of restaurants in India, and we asked, what do we have in Jain? And they said, just tell us anything. We'll make everything Jain for you.
Oh, that's great. All right. So I am putting the link in the chat. And that's a great idea. That way, instead of looking at my screen, you all can follow along if you're on your computer. All right. I put the link in the chat. And so let's take a look.
Just to add a separate comment, I know a member within our group does have a list of certain restaurants that if they let them know a day or a couple of days in advance to request Jain food, they certainly can prepare. So it'll be good if you can share that as well. I'll talk to that member.
Okay, sure thing. If you get that, then feel free to share it in the WhatsApp group, and that way we all can participate. Okay, so let's take a look there at another one. Let's see, how can I share it? Okay, it looks like it's not a window, so I'm going to share my screen here. And then you should be able to see this book. So that was a kind of a ebook you can download at the link that I sent. This book is called Prasadam, Art of Jain Cooking, and it's by Bhavna Shah, edited by Chetna Shah. And if we want to, let me put it on full screen here. That way you can see it properly. And if we want to do a similar thing, we'll take a look at the index, the table of contents, and see what kind of recipes there are. All right, so this book is divided up into different types of cuisine. So we don't have to limit ourselves to food from India, as you might expect. There's probably more Jain food from India, but for example, here we have Italian cuisine, pizzas, lasagnas, pasta recipes. The section 2 is Mexican cuisine, similar to what we saw earlier, tres leches, Mexican rice. The third one is Thai cuisine. So, I mean, this is not necessarily disconnecting emotion from food. I would use this as a stepping stone, right? To get to where you can disconnect emotions from food, because then you're talking about just using food as fuel. You're not talking about paneer, bell pepper, and baby corn skewers, right? You're going to be past that. Section 4 is Lebanese cuisine. Section 5 is Chinese cuisine. And then there's a dokra section and dips and kind of sizzler plate sections. And so this is what this book looks like. You can get it online. It costs $4.99, and you can read it on your Kindle or something like that. And here are the recipes. Okay, so that's very nice. And then I have one more for you, and that's a link. This is a blog I found. It's called Spice Up the Curry. It's by Kanan Patel. And she has collected Jain recipes. And it's over 100, she says. And there's nice pictures here for you. You can make this is primarily Indian food. And you can make all of these the Jain way. So that's the first page. This is called spiceupthecurry.com. I can put a link in here in the chat too. Let me do that. chat. Okay. All right. You have the link. So a lot of sweets. A lot of sweets. Okay. Oh, here we go. Here's some entrees. Okay. So the purpose of that is to let you know that there are resources that you can use, right? The point of it is to convince you that it's not as hard as you think to practice a Jain diet. What would you say to someone that ate meat, who told you it's too hard to be a vegetarian because there's not enough to eat? You would say, there's plenty to eat. I have plenty to eat. I have more choice than I ever could know what to do with, right? Well, the reason that you're not practicing a Jain diet is not because it's too hard to find something to eat. Okay, the point of this was to show you there's plenty to eat. There's more to eat than you could ever. You could eat a different Jain meal a day, and that would last you your whole life. Okay, the point of that exercise is to convince you that there are resources available to you, that the reason shouldn't be because that you're not practicing a Jain diet shouldn't be that it's too hard to find something. It's easy to find something, and you can do it for free. So questions or comments about that? Anybody have other resources that they recommend?
Call mom.
Right. That is the best resource, of course, your family.
Somewhere I may have Ambel food recipe booklet. Be happy to share that via WhatsApp group.
Great. Okay, so this week's challenge is to make one Jain meal that you wouldn't normally make. You can't make khichdi and then call that your Jain meal because you would have made it anyway. That doesn't count. Okay, you either have to replace a non-Jain meal with the Jain meal, or do something like that, or try a new recipe, a new Jain recipe that you wouldn't normally make. And so that is your challenge this week. Did anybody notice something that they wanted to try? And that, because the more you think about it, the more invested you'll be in it, and the more likely you are to complete this challenge, and the more my ultimate goal is to help you on your spiritual progress, right? And reduce your ahimsa and increase your samvar. So tell me which meal is right for you to replace, and what are you going to replace it with?
So you're signing us up for cooking the food then, right?
Absolutely. If you're not in charge of cooking the food in your house, then I want you to take charge of this one meal, this one non-Jain meal.
Yeah, I'm sure our wives will be happy.
You have to be the influencer.
Certainly. Remember, you're not abdicating your spiritual progress to your life, and if I'm telling you that this is part of your spiritual progress, then it certainly seems like you have abdicated that to your wife. I certainly understand, but yes, you have to take charge of this. Did anybody see anything interesting? Did they want to try some Jain Indian cuisine, or a different one, an Italian Jain cuisine, or a Mexican or Thai Jain cuisine?
So I'm going to try something Mexican, because one of the things we're trying, or I think we've been doing, is not go to a restaurant that serves meat. And for Mexican food, it's pretty hard. There are actually one or two vegan places that has vegan, but then also we have to watch out for Jain. So with that said, I think that's one of our challenge to cook Jain Mexican food, so we don't crave for outside Mexican food. So I will. That's the step I'll try towards.
That's great. That's perfect. My wife and I recreate meals we like at restaurants, and then we never go to that restaurant again once we have it the way we like it. So that's using that same idea and then doing what's important to you, which is not supporting a restaurant if it serves meat at all. So that's great. Anybody else did some recipe catch their eye? Okay, so tell me which one you're going to replace, because nobody completed last week's challenge. I want people to complete this week's challenge.
We have the link. We're going to try it for sure. Either one of the dinner time or I don't know. I didn't catch any of the particular ones, but there are so many interesting ideas on those recipe books. So we'll definitely try one.
Right.
This week.
Yeah, so personally for me, to cook tofu fried rice, certainly with onions and garlic, but I can definitely try that the Jainism way and see, like, if I can blend in one of the recipes that was shared.
That's a great idea. How about we hack our brain to increase our spiritual progress? That is, we take a food that we know we like, and just like with making a restaurant dish at home, we make that one the Jain way, and we perfect it until we really like it again. You know, it won't happen the first time, but we keep working at it until we really like it. And then that food that we really like and we really crave is Jain food. And we're using our likes and dislikes to our advantage to further our spiritual progress. I like that idea. You have a food you already like, you try to convert it to a Jain one, and you keep eating it. That's great. So questions or comments about anything we talked about. First, we went over the theory of why the Jain diet exists. Second, we looked at the non-Jain items, and we had some kind of issues with the list. Everybody's going to have a different list because ahimsa is a spectrum. Third, we looked at resources available to us to practice a Jain diet. And fourth, we made a commitment to replace one non-Jain meal with a Jain meal. Questions or comments about any of that?
No comments on this week, but once this one is done, I was not there last week. If you don't mind, just give us just one more time. I heard in the beginning you have to say no to work on yourself or something for last week's challenge. I have a question on that, or at least I was not there, but I wanted to understand a little more.
Yeah, I'm sorry. A couple people weren't there, and I didn't get the audio up in time to prepare for this week. I should get it up early this week.
No, it was not meant to feel you bad.
No, that's fine. So last week's challenge was to say no to something you really wanted, and that will make you realize that your desires enslave you. And once you realize, and that gives you a feeling of power, a feeling of breaking your chains. At least that's the theory. In reality, it will probably make you feel bad at first to say no to something you really wanted. And it depends where you are on the spiritual progress ladder. If you're very far, you will feel great to say no about something you wanted. If you're not there yet, you have to convince yourself it's a good idea, and then you'll feel bad about it at first, just like exercise. You feel bad after you exercise at first, but if you exercise enough, then you start to feel good after you exercise. Last week's class, let me think.
So let me ask you that.
Yeah.
Saying no that you like to do, and if you convince yourself that you are doing this one for somebody else and you're saying no, would that be a different? The item you like to do, you want to, if you want to stop that item, not for your purpose, but if you do it for somebody else's purpose, would that be bad or odd? Or?
No, that would be against the spirit of the challenge because it's just excuses. Yeah.
Okay.
Does anybody remember what last week's class was?
Well, what I remember, it's like, it's sort of like if I want to I'm eating right now. I got 2 rotis. I ate 2 rotis, and the third one I'm going to eat. I want to eat, but I don't really need it I just want to eat it. It's like controlling your mind that something, or it's a roti or ice cream or something like that you really want to eat just to feel good about it. Get your, okay, you did it. Now you control your mind. Same as taking bada for something you like, and you control your mind. Is that correct recollection?
Yes, last week's class we discussed 15 exercises that you can do daily to practice Stoicism. And we realized that Stoicism has a lot in common with Jainism. In fact, the two fit hand in glove together. So we took these 15 Stoic exercises and we revealed the Jain philosophy behind them. So I'll have that up for you this week. It's a very interesting listen.
Good.
Yes, Mihir.
So I wanted to go back to the food and actually my sort of I don't know if I want to call it concern, but the vegan versus the Jain. So here's what happened. We were going to India, and we tried to get all 4 of our food Jain, and they had some issues, and then they brought us vegan food. And you know what was the impressive part about that? The flight attendant who came to us talking about it, she knew exactly what the Jainism is. She checked that the vegan food that she was offering did not have any root vegetables. And so she checked all the ingredients and said, okay, this will work for you. And that was very impressive. What I wonder, I think we should thank whoever did this Jainism, or made sure that everybody knows about it, what Jainism is. To me, that was great. If we as a Jain, as an entire society, say, okay, veganism is Jainism, and not that I'm saying that, but if that happens, if we take path towards it, then what happens is we risk at the legacy that was created, and for right reasons we just reviewed that we should not be eating root vegetables as Jains. I feel a danger there, and it just could be myself. So my earlier comment was definitely like I think Chintan also said, Timir, I think you spoke correctly. I think you had the right idea. In this forum, I don't think that's an issue, but I think if we as a society somehow accept to the outside world's perception that vegan is Jain, then I think there's a risk. And that's why I think we should be mindful of that. That's, again, my personal perception. I don't, I just feel that, like, for example, nowadays, if you go to some restaurant, they call it Swaminarayan. Do you want Swaminarayan? Like, okay, yes. That's how it is Jainism right now. You go to any restaurant in India and call Jain, they know exactly what you're talking about. And they'll ask you, do you eat gajar? Or, sometimes there's a little exceptions that some take. So that would be my bigger concern as a community. And it's not as for us. And that I don't know if does anybody share that, or it's just me.
I don't think. I think people have a very clear concept, at least on the vegan side, and the people who has inclination or the background from the Jainism, I think they are kind of very clear, distinguish the difference between the two. I think vegan approach is more towards who are completely using, meat, and maybe more on because even Jain diet, if you saw some books, it has some curd and all that too, which is not a vegan. So if you look at it, the milk product is different story completely in its own. So I think most of the people who has some exposure to Jainism would probably be very clear the vegan is truly not a Jain food, but it is a step towards from non-vegetarian food in my mind.
and I'm personally glad. I just hope it continues. I just don't hope. My worry is, what if that distinction vanishes? I think we as a Jain we should continue this approach. And just my skepticism. It could be just that.
And the flight attendants, what you mentioned, I think they're very well educated in that sense. They probably don't know about the Jainism is, but they do know the differences on that piece because they clearly qualified as a Jain food. So they have to know that difference. So I'm glad that they managed to get you something on that side, which is very, very impressive. So anywhere anybody puts the Jain word, they better know the difference. Because I've been other extreme too. Places you go and you say I want vegetarian food and they will ask like, do you eat fish? It's very extreme, right? I mean, they have no difference. They do not know any differences. So, but I think awareness is much more than 10 years ago, 15 years ago for Jainism, for vegetarian, for veganism. So, yeah. Don't worry, just keep promoting me here.
Other questions or comments? Well, thank you so much for your time this week. I really appreciate it, and I do not take it for granted. And remember, you're trying to replace one non-Jain meal with a Jain meal this week.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.